March 23, 1945. 30 miles south of the Rhine River, Germany, Captain Hans Rudel watches his wingman's Stuka cartwheel across a French wheat field, trailing black smoke and pieces of wing fabric. Two P-47 Thunderbolts scream past at 400 miles per hour, already climbing for another pass. Rudel's hands tighten on the stick of his Junkers Ju 87. The Stuka, affectionately called a flying anvil by German pilots and less flattering names by everyone else, has a maximum speed of 255 miles per hour in level flight. The American fighters hunting him are nearly twice as fast. He's flying what every Luftwaffe pilot knows is a death sentence in 1945. The Stuka's glory days ended at the Battle of Britain in 1940. Slow, ungainly, and vulnerable, it's been relegated to night harassment missions on the Eastern Front. Losses are catastrophic. Operational Stukas have dropped from over 400 aircraft in 1943 to fewer than 100 now. The numbers tell the story. Against modern fighters, Stuka formations suffer 40% casualties on daylight missions. Soviet pilots call them flying coffees, easy targets to collect kills. But Rudel doesn't turn for home. He doesn't climb. He doesn't even try to run. Instead, he does something the Americans aren't expecting. He pushes the nose down, aiming directly at the column of Sherman tanks advancing toward the river crossing. What happens in the next 4 minutes will defy everything Allied intelligence believes about obsolete aircraft and tactical doctrine. By the time Rudel's Stuka climbs back through the cloud deck, 8 American tanks will be burning on the road below, and one pilot will have demonstrated that in the right hands, even the slowest aircraft in the fleet can become the most lethal weapon on the battlefield. By March 1945, the Junkers Ju 87 Stuka should have been a museum piece. The gull-winged dive bomber that terrorized Poland in 1939 and screamed across France in 1940 had become a relic outclassed by every modern fighter in the sky. The statistics backed up the obsolescence. Maximum speed, 255 miles per hour, slower than some reconnaissance aircraft. Service ceiling, 24,000 feet, laughable compared to high-altitude fighters. Defensive armament, 2 7.92mm machine guns facing rearward against a P-51 Mustang carrying 650 caliber Brownings and capable of 440 miles per hour. The Stuka might as well have been a training glider. The Reich Air Ministry knew it. Production had been slashed from 900 aircraft in 1943 to just 230 in 1944. Most surviving Stukas were stripped of their dive brakes and repurposed as night harassment bombers, nuisance raiders that dropped small bombs on Soviet positions under cover of darkness. Luftwaffe pilots called these missions sewing machine runs because of the sound the laboring engines made. But one pilot saw something different in the aircraft everyone else had written off. Hans-Ulrich Rudel wasn't supposed to be flying Stukas at all. He'd washed out of fighter training twice. His instructors said he lacked the aggression needed for air combat. Reluctantly assigned to dive bomber school in 1940, he showed no particular talent. His squadron commander at Imola Air Base in Austria rated him below average in his fitness report. Then came the Eastern Front. What made the Stuka lethal in Rudel's hands wasn't speed or altitude performance. It was the one thing the aircraft could do better than any other plane in the Luftwaffe inventory: deliver ordnance with surgical precision. The Ju-87's dive brakes allowed it to drop at a 90-degree angle while maintaining controllable speed, where American dive bombers like the Dauntless pulled out at 3,000 feet. The Stuka could hold its dive until 300 feet, close enough to place a 1,000-pound bomb within meters of a target. That precision meant everything when the target was a 30-ton T-34 tank with armor thick enough to shrug off near misses. By 1943, Rudel's aircraft carried something else: two underwing 37mm Bordkanon cannons. Each gun fired tungsten core armor-piercing rounds at 160 rounds per minute. The recoil was so violent that firing both guns simultaneously could slow the Stuka by 20 miles per hour. But those rounds could penetrate 40 mm of armor at 300 meters. Records from the period indicate that Rudel destroyed his first tank in September 1941. By 1942, he'd developed a doctrine that went against everything in the Luftwaffe tactical manual. Instead of diving from altitude, he flew contour-hugging passes at 50 feet, often below the traverse range of tank turrets. Instead of attacking in formation, he hunted alone or with a single wingman, maximizing surprise. The results were statistically improbable. While the average Stuka pilot on the Eastern Front completed 400 combat sorties, Rudel flew his 1,000th mission in February 1944. While most dive bomber units were lucky to confirm 5 tank kills per month, Rudel was personally credited with dozens. Soviet tank commanders learned to recognize his aircraft. Intelligence reports from Red Army units described the Stuka with the black tulip painted on its wheel spats, Rudel's personal insignia. When his aircraft appeared, standing orders were to abandon vehicles immediately and scatter. For most of the war, Rudel's tactics worked because he was fighting Soviet armor in the open steppes of the Eastern Front. But March 1945 presented a different challenge. Allied forces were pushing into Germany itself. Supported by P-47 Thunderbolts and Spitfires that owned the skies, the Luftwaffe was reduced to flying individual sorties at dawn and dusk, whenever weather or luck might provide cover. The operational reality was brutal. Germany was losing the air war not aircraft by aircraft, but by the hundreds. What Rudel was attempting, flying daylight ground attack missions in a Stuka against Allied mechanized columns, was considered suicide by every remaining Luftwaffe commander. Allied intelligence had good reason to stop tracking Stuka losses by March 1945. The aircraft simply wasn't a threat anymore. American fighter pilots called them cold meat, the aerial equivalent of shooting targets on a practice range. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group wrote in his combat diary, "Came across 3 Stukas heading east at low altitude. Shot down all 3 in less than 2 minutes. They didn't even try to maneuver, like killing wounded ducks." The mathematics of air combat supported the contempt. A P-47 Thunderbolt could overtake a Stuka at a closure rate of 150 miles per hour. Even if the German pilot saw the attack coming, he had perhaps 20 seconds from visual contact to impact. The Stuka's only defensive maneuver, a snap turn that could pull 4 Gs, might buy 5 additional seconds. Against 8 50 caliber machine guns firing 800 rounds per minute combined, those seconds meant nothing. By early 1945, Allied fighter pilots had stopped counting Stukas as legitimate kills. The aircraft was so obsolete that shooting one down was considered unsporting, like claiming credit for destroying a reconnaissance biplane. What Allied commanders didn't realize was that the absence of Stuka sightings didn't mean they'd stopped flying. It meant Rudel had adapted his tactics again. He was now flying alone, launching before dawn or at dusk, when Allied fighter patrols were landing to refuel. He approached targets from unexpected directions, following river valleys, using cloud cover, exploiting the terrain that faster aircraft couldn't safely navigate at low altitude. Most critically, he'd reduced his attack profile to a single pass, lasting under 2 minutes. By the time Allied fighters scrambled to intercept, he was 30 miles away, hedge-hopping at 100 feet where radar couldn't track him. American tank crews had a different perspective. They'd encountered something that shouldn't exist. A Stuka that appeared without warning, destroyed multiple vehicles, and vanished before anyone could get a shot off. After-action reports from the 3rd Armored Division described a lone German dive bomber attacking a mechanized column near Siegburg on March 19th. 4 Sherman tanks were destroyed in 90 seconds. Fighter cover arrived 5 minutes after the attack ended. The Stuka was never located. Similar reports came from the 9th Armored Division, the 7th Armored Division, and British XXX Corps. The pattern was identical. Dawn or dusk attack, single aircraft, multiple tanks destroyed, aircraft gone before air support could respond. Allied intelligence analysts assumed these were isolated incidents, desperate German pilots on suicide missions, getting lucky before being shot down. The idea that one pilot in an obsolete aircraft could be systematically hunting Allied armor seemed absurd. Then came March 23rd and the Rhine crossing operation. Over 300 tanks and armored vehicles were advancing toward bridge sites along a 20-mile front. Allied air superiority was total. Over 500 fighter bombers flew continuous patrols overhead. Luftwaffe reconnaissance had been obliterated weeks earlier. German forces were fighting blind, retreating in chaos. The last thing American commanders expected was a lone Stuka penetrating their fighter screen. But that's exactly what Rudel had been counting on. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about Hans-Ulrich Rudel and the Ju-87 Stuka's unlikely combat career. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about the tank-killing variant with 37mm cannons before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Hans-Ulrich Rudel lifted off from a damaged Autobahn section at 0547 hours, 23 minutes before sunrise. His Ju-87 G2, the tank-hunting variant, carried 2 37mm cannons under the wings and a single 1,000-pound bomb on the centerline rack. Total ammunition, 12 rounds per cannon, 1 bomb, 1 pass. The weather was perfect for what he intended. Low clouds at 100 feet, scattered fog in the river valleys, visibility under 2 miles. Too dangerous for mass formations, too restricted for high-altitude patrols. The Americans would have fighter cover up, but they'd be flying at 5,000 feet above the Merc. Rudel stayed at 80 feet. He followed the Sieg River Valley northwest, his wingtips almost brushing the trees on either bank. This was navigation by memory and instinct. He'd studied reconnaissance photos for 3 days, memorizing every curve, every village, every bridge. The overcast ceiling meant he was invisible from above. The terrain masking meant ground-based radar couldn't paint him. At 6 hours, he saw it. The American mechanized column stretched along Route 8, 40 Sherman tanks advancing in a staggered formation toward the Rhine bridge site. Half-tracks and supply trucks filled the gaps. The entire column was moving at 15 miles per hour, churning up dust that hung in the still morning air. No air cover visible. The fighter patrols were somewhere above the cloud deck. Rudel climbed to 300 feet, just high enough to clear the ridgeline and set up his attack angle. He armed the cannons and switched off the dive brakes. This wouldn't be a vertical dive. This would be a shallow 20-degree gun run, coming in fast and low from the column's rear quarter, where the tank commanders wouldn't see him until he was already firing. He pushed the nose down. The Stuka accelerated to 280 miles per hour in the descent, the fastest it could safely manage with the underwing cannons. The lead Sherman filled his gun sight. Range, 400 meters and closing. At 250 meters, he squeezed both triggers. The 37mm Sport Canone cannons roared, their recoil shaking the entire airframe. Rudel felt the Stuka slow violently. Each shot was like hitting a wall of air. Tungsten core rounds streaked downward at 2,500 feet per second, converging on the Sherman's engine deck. First burst, 3 rounds, 2 hits. The Sherman's rear armor, 40mm thick, couldn't stop tungsten cores fired at this angle. The tank erupted in orange flame as the engine compartment ignited. Rudel's Stuka flashed over the burning wreck at 50 feet. Tank commanders were scrambling to rotate turrets, but he was already past them, acquiring the second target. Range, 200 meters. Second burst, 4 rounds. 3 hits on the turret ring. The Sherman slewed sideways as the driver panicked, then lurched to a stop. Smoke poured from the hatches. Third target. The column was scattering now, tanks breaking formation, trying to disperse. But they were road-bound, limited by the ditches on either side. Rudel flew down the column length like he was strafing a railway line. Third burst, 3 rounds. The Sherman's fuel tanks exploded in a fireball that sent debris 100 feet into the air. His ammunition counters read 4 rounds remaining per gun. 8 shots total, fourth target. This crew had their turret turned, the 75mm gun tracking his aircraft. Rudel rolled 30 degrees left, dropping even lower, now at 30 feet, close enough to see the American tank commander standing in the cupola, frantically gesturing. He fired. 2 rounds hit the Sherman's side armor at the junction between the hull and turret, the weakest point. The tank simply stopped. No fire, no explosion. Mission kill. Crew would be bailing out. 5 rounds remaining. The P-47s would be diving through the clouds now. Someone below had radioed for help. Rudel had 60 seconds before Thunderbolts arrived with 8 50 caliber guns each, and he was flying an aircraft that couldn't outrun a training biplane. Fifth target. A Sherman was reversing, trying to back into a side road. Rudel lined up the shot from 150 meters. Final burst. 5 rounds. 4 hit the engine deck in a tight group. The Sherman's ammo storage detonated, a catastrophic kill that flipped the turret 20 feet backward. Ammunition, 0, but he still had the 1,000-pound bomb on the centerline rack. The lead elements of the column had stopped completely, crews abandoning vehicles running for the tree line. But mid-column, where the half-tracks and supply trucks were packed together, traffic was jammed. They couldn't move forward or back. Rudel climbed to 200 feet and rolled inverted, pulling the Stuka into a modified dive. Not the vertical plunge the aircraft was designed for. He didn't have altitude for that, but a 45-degree angle that would let him pickle the bomb from 800 feet. His altimeter unwound. 800 feet, 600 feet. At 500 feet, he released. The bomb fell away, stabilizing fins snapping open. Rudel pulled out hard, 4 Gs crushing him into the seat, vision tunneling gray at the edges. The Stuka groaned, stressed to the limits of its design. At 150 feet, he leveled out. Behind him, the 1,000-pound bomb hit the roadway dead center in the halted column. The blast wave destroyed 3 half-tracks, flipped 2 supply trucks, and cratered the road itself. Secondary explosions ripped through ammunition trailers. Rudel shoved the throttle forward and dove back into the Sieg River Valley, racing east at treetop level. His fuel gauge showed 15 minutes remaining. His ammunition counters read empty. He'd been over the target area for 140 seconds. 8 tanks destroyed or disabled. Multiple support vehicles obliterated. An entire American mechanized column stalled on the approach to a critical bridge site. Above him, 4 P-47 Thunderbolts finally broke through the clouds, searching for a target that was already 7 miles away and dropping out of sight into the next valley. The after-action analysis by Allied intelligence took 3 days to compile. What they discovered contradicted fundamental assumptions about obsolete aircraft and modern warfare. The technical reality of what Rudel had accomplished came down to 3 factors that American planners had dismissed as irrelevant. First, weapon effectiveness at close range. The Stuka's 37mm Bordkanone BK 3.7 cannons fired tungsten carbide ammunition that could penetrate 95 millimeters of armor at 100 meters. That was more penetration than the Sherman's own 75-millimeter gun could achieve against German armor. Allied intelligence had known the Stuka G variant carried these weapons since 1943, but analysis concluded that slow approach speeds would make them unusable against alerted defenders. What Rudel proved was that surprise and terrain masking neutralized the speed disadvantage entirely. Tank crews couldn't defend against weapons they couldn't see coming. Second, aircraft survivability at ultra-low altitude. American tactical doctrine assumed ground attack. Aircraft needed speed and altitude to survive defensive fire. The Stuka had neither, but what it did have was structural strength and simplicity. Test pilots at Wright Field, who examined captured Stukas, noted the aircraft's robust construction, particularly the fixed landing gear and simplified control systems. One report stated, the Ju-87 can absorb battle damage that would down more sophisticated aircraft. Its low speed and lack of complex systems mean critical failures are rare. Rudel demonstrated this principle repeatedly. His aircraft returned from missions with battle damage that would have destroyed a P-47. Control cables severed, oil lines punctured, over 600 bullet holes counted after one sortie. The Stuka's redundant control systems and manual backups meant he could fly at home on pure mechanical linkages when hydraulics failed. Third, tactical adaptation overcoming technological obsolescence. This was the revelation that troubled Allied analysts most. Intelligence reports from March 1945 show a clear pattern. Rudel had effectively reinvented ground attack doctrine around his aircraft's limitations. He flew alone, eliminating the coordination delays of formation flying. He attacked at dawn and dusk, exploiting the gaps in fighter patrol schedules. He used terrain masking that faster aircraft couldn't safely navigate. He reduced his exposure time to under 2 minutes per attack, faster than Allied response times could accommodate. Most critically, he'd turned the Stuka's 255-mile-per-hour maximum speed into an advantage. At ultra-low altitude, his slow speed gave him more time to acquire targets, line up shots, and react to ground fire. A P-47 making a gun run at 400 miles per hour had perhaps 3 seconds of firing time on a target. Rudel's Stuka gave him 8 to 10 seconds per target, enough time to fire, observe hits, and adjust aim if necessary. The broader implications were uncomfortable for Allied tactical planners. The U.S. Army Air Forces had invested billions in developing fast, high-altitude bombers and fighters. The doctrine was speed and firepower, overwhelming the enemy through technological superiority. What Rudel demonstrated was that tactics, skill, and intimate knowledge of weapon systems could matter more than raw performance specifications. A pilot who understood his aircraft's capabilities and exploited them within precisely defined parameters could accomplish missions that doctrine said were impossible. By April 1945, Allied intelligence had distributed tactical bulletins warning armored units about the lone Stuka threat. Recommendations included: maintain continuous 360-degree observation, increase spacing between vehicles, ensure fighter cover during all movement operations, and coordinate with anti-aircraft units. The irony wasn't lost on Allied analysts. They were issuing tactical warnings about an aircraft that first flew in 1935, a design older than most of the pilots flying against it. But the combat reports kept coming. Rudel flew his final combat sortie on May 8, 1945, hours before Germany's surrender. His last attack: 2 Soviet tanks destroyed in the morning twilight near the Czech border. Total confirmed kills by that date: 519 tanks. Hans-Ulrich Rudel survived the war. On May 8, 1945, he flew his damaged Stuka to an American-controlled airfield in Austria and surrendered. his aircraft, bearing over 2,000 combat mission markings and the Black Tulip insignia, was immediately seized for intelligence analysis. The statistics of his combat record remain unprecedented. In 2,130 combat sorties, Rudel was shot down or forced to crash land 32 times. He was wounded 5 times, including losing his right leg below the knee in 1945 after ground fire severed his femoral artery. He flew his next combat mission 3 weeks later with a prosthetic leg. Beyond the 519 confirmed tank kills, his record included the Soviet battleship Marat, sunk in Kronstadt Harbor in 1941, 2 cruisers damaged beyond repair, a destroyer, 70 landing craft, over 800 vehicles and 150 artillery positions destroyed. He was the only person ever awarded the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, Germany's highest military decoration, specially created for him by Hitler in January 1945. The immediate tactical impact of Rudel's operations is harder to quantify but appears in Soviet and Allied after-action reports from 1944-1945. Red Army tank units on the Eastern Front developed specific protocols for Stuka alert conditions, dispersal patterns, and movement restrictions triggered by reports of his aircraft in the operational area. American mechanized units in Germany during March-April 1945 requested additional fighter cover specifically to counter low-level dive bomber threats. Post-war, Rudel's combat methods influenced close air support doctrine in unexpected ways. The U.S. Air Force studied his tactics during development of the A-10 Thunderbolt II in the 1970s. The A-10's design philosophy, heavily armored, low-speed, focused on precision tank killing with a massive cannon, echoes principles Rudel proved with the Stuka 3 decades earlier. The GAU-8 Avenger 30mm cannon that arms the A-10 is a direct descendant of the concept. Penetrate armor at close range with volume and precision rather than standoff missiles. The Soviet Union drew different lessons. Their Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft, already in production during the war, was refined post-1945 to emphasize ultra-low altitude attack profiles and pilot survivability through armor rather than speed. Soviet tactical doctrine for close air support stressed individual pilot initiative and terrain masking approaches, principles Rudel had demonstrated were effective even with obsolete equipment. The personal aftermath was more complicated. Rudel emigrated to Argentina in 1948, where he worked as an aviation consultant. He remained an unrepentant National Socialist until his death in 1982, refusing to renounce Nazi ideology despite repeated requests from German veterans organizations. His military achievements are historically documented and tactically studied, but his post-war political statements have made him a controversial figure in military history. The Stuka itself disappeared from service rapidly. By 1946, nearly all surviving aircraft had been scrapped. A handful exist in museums, static displays of a design from aviation's earlier era. None are airworthy today, but the lessons remained. In the right hands, with the right tactics, even the slowest aircraft in the fleet could become the most lethal weapon on the battlefield. War has a way of revealing uncomfortable truths about capability and doctrine. The Allies flew faster aircraft, built better engines, deployed superior technology. They won the air war through industrial capacity and technological advancement. That victory was decisive and inevitable. But Hans-Ulrich Rudel's record demonstrates something that transcends technology, the combat multiplier of mastery. He didn't win because his aircraft was superior. He won individual engagements because he understood his weapon system at a level that eliminated the distinction between pilot and machine. He flew the Stuka the way a master swordsman wields a blade, not through strength, but through perfect knowledge of balance, timing, and technique. Every military in history struggles with this tension. Invest in better technology or invest in better training? Build faster aircraft or develop better tactics? The answer is always both, but the ratio matters. What Rudel proved was that a skilled operator with inferior equipment could consistently defeat superior equipment operated conventionally. 1 aircraft, 519 tanks, 2,130 combat missions in a design that should have been obsolete years before the war ended. Sometimes the machines we reject teach us more than the ones we embrace. The Stuka was slow, vulnerable, and outdated. In Rudel's hands, it was the most lethal ground attack aircraft of World War II, not because it was the best aircraft, but because he was the best pilot to fly it. And sometimes that difference matters more than all the engineering specifications in the world. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.